Right, delighted on ARVR Innovate to welcome into the virtual studio Niall Campion, who's a co-founder of VRAI, an Irish company in the virtual reality space. Thanks very much, first of all, for joining us today.
Thanks, Alex. Great to
We're
be
going to
here.
take a review of some of the things that happened in 2024, and we'll obviously get your own reflections on those, some of the major industry things that have been happening and trends. But for people who don't know your company, particularly people maybe outside of Ireland who'll be watching this video, tell me and the viewers about VRAI, first of all.
Yeah, so like short history maybe is the best way to describe what we do. So we started off as a VR company doing VR for a bunch of different purposes, primarily though focused on training reasonably early on, and then also focused on defense, security, aerospace as a niche that we had expertise in. As we kind of grew the company, and might get into this later, or maybe we won't, but developed a tool within VR that allowed us to start to validate the training through data capture. So capturing data from both the VR headset and also from the simulation software, and using that to validate the effectiveness of the training. What we found though is as we grew that tool, it became sort of a standalone product by itself. So we call it Product Heat, and it's effectively that is now our main focus of business. So it's the ability to capture, store, analyze, and visualize data being generated from simulations is really what we do. Primarily it's through VR, but actually like we found ourselves across the sort of simulation spectrum. And again, primarily probably defense security is our main market.
Yeah, and obviously in a three-dimensional world, the quantum of data that you create is just, it's multiplied, isn't it? Yep. Compared to maybe traditional training where you might be asking people to look at a video. You can measure things like what videos they clicked on, etc., or training material. I mean, give me and the viewers a little bit of an understanding of what is the challenge of that in terms of just the sheer quantum of the data and then turning that into actual useful information.
Yeah, like I'll maybe go even a level back where you're talking about like the difference between a virtual or three-dimensional world and a two-dimensional world in terms of understanding performance. Like one of the big benefits we found from VR headsets is that you can track what people are looking at and for how long, and then use that to give context to their actions. So like in a really basic example, you know, say you're driving a car, have you checked your mirrors before you pull out into traffic? And you know, in a traditional sim, all you know is that the person has pulled out into traffic. You don't know why they've done it or why they've not pulled out because they've checked their mirror and they've seen a car coming. So that ability to put sort of context on the data is really beneficial. And, you know, it's something that really, when we started doing this, or we found a big benefit in VR and the ability to do that. In terms of quantum of data, like it kind of depends on what you're trying to achieve, I would say. So, like we always talk about capturing as much data as we can, but in reality, like, yeah, you're capturing X, Y, Z positions of a head of a object, of the objects they're interacting with. But that's not that much data in the grand scheme of things, you know, like your capture, and then its frequency is the big sort of challenge, I guess. So, you know, in a VR environment where you need to be running at 90 frames a second to keep that smooth, whatever, lack of motion sickness, lack of simulation sickness, you don't really need to capture the data that frequently, we found, but we're still capturing sort of 30 samples per second, which, yeah, you do end up with a lot of data, but it's not a high volume of data, I guess. And then that's where sort of the AI piece of what we do would kick in, you know. So like we're capturing maybe 25 million data points per hour of training, too much for a human to analyze. So that's where we sort of have algorithms that'll run across it and start to look for patterns, what good performance looks like, and then what factors affect that good performance.
Yeah, that use or deployment of AI, I mean, I think that's kind of one of the themes, to me anyway, that sort of came to the fore in 2024. You know, a lot of people realizing that these technologies, they're not independent of each other. In fact, you know, for immersive tech to really achieve its potential, maybe the big opportunity is just around the corner, because AI now allows, in so many ways, to both create virtual environments in a way that would have been very time consuming in the past, but particularly, as you say, to actually make sense of how people are using it. And, you know, my own research interests this past year have been around soft skills training, you know, and I've luckily had some time from my university to focus on that, you know, the ability of AI to take a quantum of data that humans just couldn't analyze is really very exciting, just in terms of how these two technologies will really complement each other.
Yeah, and like I'll give you an example of where we've used that in the past, and like it's kind of an old example actually. So probably one of our first deployments of Heat. We worked with IAG Cargo, so British Airways, effectively in Heathrow. So we made a VR experience for them to onboard people into a warehouse. So where all the cargo in the UK or all the cargo in the South goes through before it gets to the aircraft to be shipped around the world. And so the challenge was to onboard people into that warehouse. So we made a VR experience. It was about 20, 25 minutes long, but we put some data capture into it. And what we learned when we had about 300 people through, we started analyzing the data. And what jumped out really quickly was people who were using the left controller in VR tended to score lower in general across the board from the 300 people we put through. We thought probably because maybe it's a smaller sample size because there's less left-handed people. But then we looked at the scene. So there's like 12, 15 scenes maybe in the experience. So the scene they particularly struggled in was a forklift scene. And in the forklift, we had reproduced one-to-one the controls. So they were all under the right-hand side. So what was happening is people were reaching over with their left hand and trying to control the forklift with their left hand. So they just weren't able to accurately press the buttons.
Yeah.
And so we didn't seek out looking for left-handed and right-handedness. It just manifested itself through the data.
Yeah, that's a really good example. Yeah, and in terms of the type of hardware that you guys are looking at, maybe in a moment we'll talk about some of the big announcements during 2024, and there were a lot of them. It was a very active year. But in terms of what type of kit do you guys use in terms of with your clients?
Yeah, so like I said, we still do VR, but it's really we found it's not really a product; it's more of a service that we're delivering. So typically the kit will depend on the use case. So we've done this year everything from driving sims on 6 degrees of freedom motion platforms. So you can sit in the cab and drive and it moves around. That'll have a real steering wheel as the steering wheel in the vehicle. But in terms of the VR kit for that, primarily we're finding it's VRAI. So VRAI XR3 and now XR4 are the main headsets that more our customers are asking us to provide rather than we're specifying. I guess the challenge, obviously, with those kind of headsets is they're always tethered.
Yeah.
Which means you can render at a much higher resolution, obviously, and it means you can plug in stuff like a motion platform and steering wheels, or in a flight sim you can have your proper throttle and stick controls, which are kind of harder to run in a sort of standalone headset. But then we have done standalone experience as well, sort of completely standalone. We do a bit of work in the offshore wind industry, and for that we tend towards HTC, and so previously the Vive Focus 3. Why we like that headset is because it's got the hot swappable battery and it's designed for enterprise use. So it is a specifically designed for enterprise use case. And then they've updated that, or did a midlife upgrade on that this year, which was nice to see as well. So I think it's improved the processor a little bit, and then added some other nice features that things that we were kind of going, well, it'd be great if it did. I think they've put eye tracking into it as one of the base features. Anyway, it's
interesting, isn't it? When you
are really what
people like yourselves who play in the B2B, the enterprise space, the type of stories that might have captured the imagination of the industry are ones that, not that they're not as important for you, but in fact, when you understand who your clients are, what the level of the product solution is, you're looking at different hardware solutions might be the ones people are generally talking about. But let's do that. Let's talk about some of the big were during the year. I suppose the big one at the beginning of the year, which is Apple's Vision Pro launch. If you've got to try it yourself, Niall, during the year, did you?
No, I haven't even tried it on. So I've seen it at events and I've held them, but I haven't actually put it on. My approach was with all Apple hardware, wait for Generation 2. Although I don't know if it's rumored or actually officially announced, but it doesn't seem like Generation 2 is coming anytime soon.
No, I mean, we're seeing, I did get a chance to try it myself, actually. Thanks to Andy O'Sullivan. Shout out to him in Liberty. And I did try and look at the user experience is superb, as you'd expect, just in terms of its ability to, work off finger gestures. You can have your fingers by your side. You can look at something and it'll and click your fingers, and which is really cool. And the tech specification. But I think you're right. I mean, that was my sense of it during the year. It was a huge hype, as you'd expect. I don't know whether the developer company, which is obviously the critical thing here, has really gone into it as much as they might have hoped, because clearly it's really important that they get tens of thousands of their hundreds of thousands of developers developing apps, and in a sense, one or two of those will ultimately connect with consumers. And it's not obvious that they are at the moment. I mean, most of what was shown at the conferences was a platform that allows you to see the 2D apps that we're so familiar with in a 3D space, which is not something the general public are going to really rush to adopt.
Yeah, but I think you're absolutely right. And it's where sort of the iPhone really thrived was when developers started getting involved in that app building community. I think the challenge with it as a general public device, though, is it's just too expensive. So like $3,500 or euro or whatever, like it's not sort of a casual purchase that you sort of buy for your kids at Christmas. Like,
yeah, I mean, if they were in the quarter, I'm sure they'd be quick to say, look, it's not meant to be and that's
exactly.
really,
but that's the point I'm making. Like, it's that chicken and egg of like, if you're a developer developing commercial apps and you have an investor who's saying how many thousands of B2C customers are you going to land with this app, when you're saying, well, there's only whatever X number of these in the market, like it's much easier to say developing for a phone rather than move to an XOR device.
True, but still, I think positive overall in the sense that just that Apple have they put a flag there of intent, which is that they're serious about immersive tech, and that certainly validates it. And we'll just
and they have deep pockets, so you'd hope they're in it for the long game rather than sort of testing it and going, well, the appetite for that wasn't great this year, so we're going to discontinue it. Like, I would argue that's their kind of track record. Like, first generation of the iPhone, people were like, why do I need this?
Yeah.
First generation of the iPad, people were like, that's nonsense. Why would anyone use a tablet when you can use a laptop?
Yeah. And they have a vision, excuse the pun, but they have a vision around spatial computing, that this is an entirely new spatial platform. Speaking of deep pockets, we have to come to Meta, obviously, who, a busy year for them as well, obviously. 3S, I think, was one that was announced, and I've adopted that technology myself as an educator. I'm excited about it just because of the price point, allowing educators who know we want to use these technologies, but the barriers are still price for a lot of these headsets. And it's a pretty good piece of kit. I don't know if you've tried that one during the year, but it's only launched in the last couple of months anyway.
Funnily enough, I actually ordered my first Meta headsets about a week ago. So I'm waiting on a 3S and a 3 to arrive kind of as an end of the year. I suppose we should probably, we've had a couple of customers, particularly on the Win side, say, we've bought some Meta hardware. Can you port your software across it? And we have, but all our Meta headsets were all Generation 2, so they're all Quest 2s. So I figured probably should invest in the new ones. But again, the thing with the industries we're in particular, there is a big issue with Meta's data hoovering policy. So we just can't deploy it with a lot of our customers because the information they're taking from the headset is too onerous.
That's definitely a challenge. I think, as obviously educators are excited by it, and then and they, again, in terms of intent, they've made it very clear in their actions, and they ran a dedicated educators conference there recently in London, I think it was, where they're reaching out very consciously to educators, first, second, and third level educators to develop it. I mean, Orion is an interesting one as well, isn't it, in terms of AR glasses, because it's good to see, I think, a bit of interest back in the AR glasses space, and the promise is quite enticing. I mean, obviously, it's a long way before it will be delivered, I guess, but it does seem really interesting, particularly the AI piece and how it will potentially be a device with strong AI capabilities, which will then, I think, have a lot of adoption, I would imagine.
Yeah, and you could argue that the Google Glass, whenever that was 10, 15 years ago, kind of sparked a lot of this wave of AR, VR. That died pretty quickly, I think, because it was sort of a camera functionality. And so, again, it's a privacy concern. But yeah, in terms of what you were talking about earlier, sort of what are those killer apps? For me, in an enterprise environment, I think AR is it's kind of a no-brainer a lot of the time, rather than just from, and you kind of touched on it earlier, Apple and spatial computing, and it's a new sort of way of interacting with computers and having it sort of attached to your face where, kind of any delivery guy who comes to your house or any, someone who's here to service something arrives with a tablet. So that means they're basically one-handed trying to do their job. So put that on their face and they have their two hands back again. And so the use cases that, even companies like Daiquiri years ago were promoting, these use cases are still there. It's just trying to find the right price point, and also the ease of deployment, I think, of the software is also the challenge.
Yeah.
Agreed. It's good to see glasses back because I think they're a good use case.
There's undoubtedly a consumer application around this as well, around navigation and interpretation, etc. But you're absolutely right. I mean, it's a get to the scale, get the chips. The chips are getting we could spend a long time talking about chips, but I'd be talking in the dark because I'm not an expert in it, other than to say, I think we all realize that so much of the potential for this sector is still contingent on, getting better and smarter and smaller chips, especially when you talk about hands-free devices that you're talking about there. That's going to be critical.
Yeah, or alternatively, like edge computing and cloud rendering, and using the cloud for more than just storing loads of data, but actually using it as a compute resource, and that the device in your face is a dumb device and all the rendering is being done in the cloud. But like, again, we just don't have the reliability of the internet still to do that properly.
We're seeing a bit of that. I'm going to spoof here now, because one of the things I heard about during the year was this Gaussian splat, and been reading around. But I think that's what you're driving at, this idea that you can be looking at a scene and it's just rendering that particular thing you're looking at in a space and time, and then as you move your head, for example, it renders that scene. So it just means you don't need as powerful a chip, or you don't need memory in your device itself per se.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
I was spoofing, by the way, so it's on my to-do list to read a bit more and understand this. But that's what I'm hearing. Yeah, as you say, the cloud computing side is going to be more and more important. I know Pico had an announcement during the year as well. Again, they're a player in the enterprise sector in a big way. Maybe not on everybody's radars and who'd be familiar with the other brands, but been doing good things as well in that space, and very ergonomically easy to use. Virtual spaces interest me a lot. You mentioned HTC in the hardware space, but there was also the development, which I think was exciting for Dublin, because HTC, Viverse and Viverse for Business announced that Dublin's going to be their sort of lead European centre for the development of their virtual space. I don't know, is that something you study yourselves, Niall, in VRAI? How virtual worlds could be used?
Kind of not the more commercial spaces like Viverse or Meta spaces or whatever, but more like the defense applications of that. So, and it's interesting, like it's something that, defense applications of like what would be known as metaverses have been around for a long time, which is like basically linking up a load of computers with people behind them and allowing all those people to play effectively together in the same virtual space. And like we're doing a few projects in the UK. One in particular in the UK that's trying to do that. So like trying to make a metaverse, but I use the term very loosely, for training.
That interests me hugely, by the way. For putting on my academic research hat, I'm really interested in seeing how this will evolve. I'm aware of some companies who are looking at these type of metaverses. I mean, metaverse is a word that's gone a bit out of vogue, in fairness, in the last 12 months, but the basic principle remains strong. I'm seeing companies starting to look at it around onboarding, which is really interesting, particularly around younger graduates are coming in who maybe are used to working in virtual environments, looking at different ways, and particularly when so many companies are remote working these days. The old onboarding where you brought the team were always there and you could bring them around the front. So I think that's an interesting space, this idea of using it for onboarding particularly, and doing it creatively. I think one of the mistakes people sometimes make is trying to do a digital twin replica of a training space, which to me makes no sense really, because why wouldn't you use the incredible metaphysical properties of the metaverse and VR and all of those dimensions that really foster creativity, or could foster creativity? Yeah,
exactly. Like, and I think it's hard sometimes for people to start thinking that way. They're like, well, we want to onboard people into our office, so let's do a one-to-one reproduction of our office in VR. And like we've quoted on those projects, and I remember quoting on, but like then what we always try to do is, how do you make them a little bit more magical or a little bit more exciting? So I'm like, what's in my head is, I remember quoting for one of the tech companies here to do like I remember exactly what we called it. It was like a virtual onboarding digital treasure hunt. So basically it was a one-to-one reproduction of the office space, but we were putting in like digital elements that you had to go and find around the space. Just again, to try and bring in a bit of that ability for it not just to be the real world, but like an enhanced version of the real world.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely an area that will grow. I mean, we've seen ebbs and flows. We've seen people like Mozilla Hubs come and go, but then we've seen new players in the space like Viverse. Obviously here in Ireland, shout out to the team in Engage, really doing great stuff as well in terms of building up, particularly with education providers. I think towards the back end of the year, just one final...
Can we just stick on that point, Alex? Because I think there's an important point to be made there around different metaverses, which is like, for me, the way they start to take off or whatever, become more prolific, is when standards start to evolve that allow them to play with each other. And so you think about the internet. The internet is just a collection of standards that say, this website talking to this website has to use this level of code. The problem, I think, is that the bigger companies are trying to own the space and say, well, this is what the metaverse is. Yes. It's only when they start to open up and say, like, the whatever Viverse can talk to the metaverse, and that you can move freely between them all, that's when it becomes more ubiquitous. Because what you don't want is to have like 20 different avatars or 20 different, where you're logging into this platform, you need to use this login, you just want to get online or get in and then be able to move freely between them. And that, like, it's really kind of boring, but crucial, which is like the standards on how those universe structures are. And it's interesting in defense, like those standards are evolving. So like, that the US metaverse for defense can talk to the UK one, can talk to the European one. And we're involved in a project actually in Europe where we're trying to link up, but the project is to link up all the European countries, learn to train in a standard synthetic environment.
That's really interesting. Yeah. And I mean, obviously I've been following at a distance, what's happening in XR Europe. And obviously, I mean, a big development this year, of course, is Immersive really getting off on a, firmer footing. So I think that's great to see. And the launch event, which was out there, was fantastic. And the minister, and there seems now, it's got the ear of government, which is great to see. And they're publishing, and I've been involved, contributing to some reports in the education space. So I think that's been a great, from an Irish perspective, great development in 2024, and more power that will continue to see that grow in 2025. I think a story that probably isn't but it relates to the point you've just made, which is could be significant, would be seen in hindsight as significant, is the EU Commissioner Michael McGrath, the Irish EU Commissioner, who's responsible for the digital space. Ultimately, I think in Ireland there was kind of hope that he'd get a finance ministry, etc. And maybe people didn't quite realize that this is actually a really important commissionership. And I mean, I was looking at part of his submission to the Parliament in terms of his credentials, and I mean, obviously his advisors, but explicitly he talks about metaverse and standards, etc., and making sure that Europe is a strong player in this space, and that obviously there are needs for common standards, but also the whole area of privacy, GDPR, managing the rights of human rights dimensions, which we wouldn't have time to talk in this call. But I think that's a space to watch in 2025. What Michael McGrath and the Commission there do in terms of that space, that'll be something to watch, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And like from a European perspective, and like I've been involved in some of this XR for Europe projects, like it's something that is always put forward, is like Europe is great at, because we have to by design, interoperate. So, that 32 countries all could all develop their own stuff, but actually we're better if we kind of develop a common platform or whatever. And so, I think that's something Europe could lead on, is, that idea of linking up different environments. And also, as you said, the sort of privacy GDPR, because again, I don't think people realize how much data a VR headset can collect. Like, it is significant. And we're doing a project at the moment where we've just released a function where we're doing something called cognitive load, which is a measure of how engaged you are in the training you're doing. And so the idea is, for a pilot who flies a mission, we can tell the instructor at the end of that training that this pilot was overloaded, so they weren't learning at their optimum, or they were underloaded, so they weren't learning at their optimum. But we're just doing that through data we're capturing from the VR headset. And, we're being straightforward and transparent around what we're doing, but I guarantee some of the big players aren't. They're capturing data as, that sort of famous whatever, or maybe it's made up, but like Facebook can put you in like a 95 percentile of personality type based on 20 clicks on a like button. Just think about what you can do with like how you engage with the VR scene, what you're looking at, what you're pressing, what you're engaging with, what you're throwing.
I remember writing an article, and it's up on my LinkedIn. I must maybe refresh it, as it were, but just it was kind of hypothesizing around that new measurements. But one of them was exactly that. I forget the term I'd use, but this idea of spatial stickiness. And there's like how people operate in the space will be, and how long they spend in the space, and what they look at in the space will be the sort of really important metrics going forward. I haven't got too much time left, but obviously chronologically looking at what happened during the year, I suppose towards the end of the year, like i.e. this month, a significant announcements by Google. They had a small event to actually preview an XR event, a new operating system for XR devices, and they're working with Samsung. That's obviously one to watch for 2025.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like I think I was saying earlier, like I've been so busy over the last couple of months that I just haven't been keeping up with sort of VR XR news. But yeah, like it sounds, as you've described it, like something definitely worth watching. And like we've done a lot of work with Samsung over the years. I think they're kind of an unheralded champion in the space in terms of like thinking back to their sort of the original XR device or VR devices they did, the Gear VR, which
exactly.
It's what moved me from a Apple phone to an Android phone.
Yeah, I agree. It was
8 or 9 years ago.
Very nice piece of kit. I still have it, and certainly the roller coaster experiences, which was kind of a lot of people's first exposure, wasn't it? In a Gear VR, putting your phone in, and I remember showing it to students, and that was for a lot of students, it was a wow moment. They go, "Oh, this is really interesting to watch." Before we go, now a little bit about VRAI. What are your 2024? First of all, in a sentence or two, what sort of a year was it, and more importantly, what are you looking forward to for 25?
Yeah, so I would say 24 has been our busiest year ever, which is great. We were I felt like 2 or 3 years of COVID really slowed us down in terms of our growth, and it feels like it's really starting to pick back up again. We're doing probably our biggest project at the moment, which is delivering it'll be ultimately 36 simulators in VR for the Irish Defence Forces. Wow. Which it means almost every soldier in the Irish Army is going to be training in VR at some point over the next year to 2 years when we deliver. So that will be delivered mid to back end of next year. So a lot of work going into delivering that. And then just trying to grow. So we've just opened in Orlando. So opened an office in Orlando, did that in October last year, but officially we're going to launch it in February. And so that's with the view to expanding into the US. And again, possibly isn't that well known, but the center for simulation in the US is around Orlando. So it's not just that we want to be close to Disneyland, but we're based on a university campus, and it was known as the NASA University. So it was set up when NASA were set up in Cape Canaveral or Cape Kennedy. It's about 40 minutes from there. And so most of the simulation in the US is focused on a 2 or 3 square mile area around the University of Central Florida. So we've just opened an office there, and the intention is to start growing into the US from that base.
Well, listen, I hadn't heard that news. That's really super exciting indeed.
Well, first, maybe it's an exclusive, Alex. It's actually not we're not officially launching until February, so we're kind of saying it to people as we meet them, but haven't done any press around it yet.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Well, look, it's a city I know quite well. I've had work involvement there in the past in Orlando, so a great city indeed, and wish you well with that. Wish you generally well. Do take some downtime. I hope you've had opportunity over Christmas and in the upcoming New Year to have a bit of downtime. We'll reconnect with you again in 2025, particularly around maybe that story. That's very interesting. So for now, Niall, thanks very much indeed.
Yeah, likewise, Alex. Hope you have a great Christmas and talk to you in the New Year.
That's great. Thank you.